Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Ask the Experts webinar. I'm Tracy Zatinig, Marketing Manager at Amplifi. I want to thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Exploring the EnterWorks Vendor Experience. As you know, when registering for this webinar, you had the option to pre-submit questions, which we will be answering today. During the presentation, you have the ability to submit questions through the Q&A feature seen at the bottom of your screen. Questions will be answered at the end or will be followed up on directly via email. As always, this session is being recorded and you can expect an email from us in the coming days with your link to the video, or you can locate it within our resources library on our website, goamplify.com. Without further ado, let's get to know our experts. Michael Ayanwale is the EnterWorks practice lead at Amplifi, responsible for solution and technical design for Amplifi delivery teams. He is a thought leader and MDM expert. He ensures that client solutions are both functional and scalable for present and future initiatives. His strong strategic and technical skill sets with leadership qualities help to bolster Amplifi teammates around him and instill confidence with clients and partners. Jen Yum is a senior solution consultant at Amplifi who has successfully deployed MDM solutions with Stebo Step, Salsify, Winshuttle, EnterWorks, and Riversand MDM systems. He has worked with a wide-ranging number of businesses in retail, e-commerce, and manufacturing, and across various industry sectors. Known as a problem solver, he is adept at using his experience and creativity to find efficient ways to improve processes and workflows. Brendan, if you could pronounce your last name for me.
Giovannotto.
Wonderful. Is a solution consultant with 2 years of experience integrating Stebo systems and EnterWorks at major retailers. Brendan excels at driving business results for stakeholders with his expertise in project management. During his career, Brendan has led multiple high-impact projects at the Home Depot and Floor & Decor. While working for Floor & Decor, he was a key player in the implementation of Stebo systems. And last but definitely not least, David Howard is a solution engineer at EnterWorks with a background in software with EnterWorks at Winshuttle. With a background in software development, sales, and implementation, David brings a diverse set of skills to any engagement. David has provided technology guidance to companies in the US and Europe and has previously worked with Computer Associates, GXS, and Assurion. Based out of Leesburg, Virginia, his hobbies include model rocketry and flying RC aircraft. That's pretty cool. All right, guys. Well, let's learn about the vendor experience.
Yep. So thank you, Tracy, for that introduction. And thank you, everyone, for joining our session today. So before we get into the vendor portal concepts and best practices, I always like to start off with use cases and the requirements and what's driving the need to build a vendor portal, because the vendor portal is a hot topic and very popular with a lot of our customers that we currently work with. So one of the main use cases that we hear around the vendor portal is how can we better create a user experience for external users who are not typically going to be accessing the application, right? So, these users are typically data entry level users. For a lot of suppliers and vendors, these users are really seasonal, right? So they may be used to onboard specific products for, a given season. So Christmas or the summertime. So the question is how do we create the great user experience that makes it easy and intuitive for these users to come on our application and onboard their products or their actual vendor information. And within the EnterWorks platform, it is possible and it is flexible to create very seamless and user-friendly dashboards and widgets that can drive the experience and just hone in for a particular user just to action on a particular task, which is specifically just to onboard their products and services or their vendor records. So a lot of use cases that goes along with that would be, onboarding their products. So that basically means that instead of your internal users onboarding products that may be received from vendors in the forms of spreadsheets and documents, the vendor is actually going into the EnterWorks application and they are onboarding their products directly into the system. So that eliminates a step from the retailer or the CPG company having to have that dialogue between the vendor to receive that information. And now that information is being directly fed into the EnterWorks application. The others is, how do we allow our vendors to onboard banking and other types of vendor information like ABAs, so annual buying agreements, vendor buying agreements, W-9s, and banking information into the EnterWorks application. And that could be done by means like widgets and the abilities to upload assets tied to vendor records or products directly into the application. Now with the EnterWorks application itself, you can configure the Enable 2020 UI to present that streamless capabilities for an external user. So now you can really use widgets to drive functionality that allows users to onboard or drop products into a widget. And then you can also configure the application to tie an internal record ID that is specific to a record directly to a user, and now they only have the capability of seeing products that are or records that are available or linked to their accounts, right? So there's no need for an internal user to see all of the vendor records or products that you may carry or vendors that you do business with. They only need a limited scope and really just their records that are associated with their accounts to complete the onboarding process. You can also customize the home page and landing widgets to images and logos that are specific to your business, right? So you can, remove a lot of the EnterWorks logos that you see in the 2020 UI to something that's more specific to your business line. So it's more customizable and creates a better user experience for your external users. So moving on from that, I think we want to go ahead and get a little bit deeper into some of the various use cases that we've used the EnterWorks 2020 UI to solve a lot of different customer requirements that we have experienced through the application. In particular, Jen has vast experience in leveraging the UI widgets that allows external users to drop assets that are associated with products and to also leverage shortcut links, right, that can be used to display specific documents that directs users on how to quickly navigate the UI to complete a certain task.
Yeah, so happy to share some of our experience with configuring vendor portals. As Michael mentioned, one of the things I think it's really important to reiterate is just how important it is to make sure that the vendor portal UI is just as user-friendly as possible. These people, they're not in the system frequently, and also for yourselves, you want to minimize the amount of training that you have to give these vendors. So again, there are several tools in the 2020 UI that we can sort of utilize to kind of customize and tailor the user experience for vendors to help streamline their workflow. As Michael mentioned, there's a lot of built-in widgets that we can use to do things like visualizing workflow statuses, even showing record validity or displaying assets. And for anything that happens outside of the dashboard, there are shortcuts that we can predefine so that not only will it take them to the screen that they need, but it may apply something like a save search or advanced search configuration as well to direct them to the exact products that they need to look at. We also have a couple examples of dashboard widgets that we had to configure recently because of some particular challenges that we ran into during a few implementations that I wanted to talk about. So of course, the out-of-box widgets are great, as I mentioned, but we had a few particular scenarios where we had to go a little bit outside of the boundaries of what the built-in widgets were capable of. So I wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit. In particular, the scenario that we ran into was we had a particular situation where we had multiple vendors that had assets with the same file names. And this is something that we can see in industries such as manufacturing or automotive, where there may be a lot of common or compatible part numbers. And so normally the way that we would deal with this to make sure that there's no collisions in terms of overlapping file names would be to use the built-in function where we can append a timestamp to the file name that makes sure that the file name is unique and the files don't get overwritten. However, with this particular vendor, that wasn't an option because the vendors needed to also be able to upload images and replace old images that they may have loaded. They weren't necessarily going to be loading just the new images each time. So we wanted to minimize the amount of work needed to match up those new images to the old ones and allow those overwrites to happen. So how did we solution for this? Well, with our relationship with Winshuttle, we were able to collaborate and create a custom widget that we could develop and then plug into the 2020 UI. The custom widget functions similar to the built-in asset upload widget. However, in this case, instead of appending something like a timestamp, we would append the vendor ID to the end of the file name. That kept the file name unique between vendors, but when a vendor was uploading a new version of the same asset, it would still allow them to overwrite their own images. We also had a similar situation with product data. Of course, with product data, there are also widgets that are available so that you can create templates to make it easy for vendors to load in their data. And we have widgets that we can use to load those into the system as well. However, ideally, what you would do is have the vendors load in the new product data through the widget. And if it's not possible to just separate out the new products, then you would at least have them include the vendor ID as part of the data. And that's just because of some nuance in the way the system handles the security context. However, in this particular scenario, again, we had a situation where the vendors were not able to separate out the new products and updates, and also they were not able to include the vendor ID as part of the import. So again, we created a custom widget that ran the file through a preprocessor before it got picked up by the system. And the preprocessor will take the vendor ID and include that as part of the data so that we can make sure to process all the information correctly. And all of that is something that the vendor wouldn't even see. It's just all things that happen in the background, and they wouldn't have to worry about that at all when they were doing their uploads. So these are some of the unique kind of situations that we ran into recently. I'll hand it off back to Michael.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So in regards to the custom asset widget that your team developed, did external vendors, did they upload like zip files that contain multiple assets, or were these like individual asset or documents that were uploaded to the EnterWorks application?
So in this case, they were loading just the assets themselves, not in a zip file or anything like that. But the widget does have the ability to load multiple assets at a time. So so it preserves kind of that same functionality as out of the box, where we can handle bulk uploads as well. Cool.
That's very interesting. So I know with the vendor portal or the 2020 UI, each client or each customer would have a different experience in regards to automation and workflows. And a lot of this is driven by the data model for that specific client. Do you have any examples of workflows that you have configured or designed that help with automation and help facilitate the ability for vendors to quickly onboard their products for a given customer?
Yeah, so of course, with a vendor portal, the primary goal is to get your vendor data loaded into the system. So once we get the data loaded in, we want to utilize workflows where we can to help with getting those records ready for your use. So of course, as you mentioned, all the workflows are going to be kind of unique to each client. But they're all going to help with doing things like governing your process and automating repetitive tasks and allowing better tracking of your tasks. A couple things I do want to highlight that we have done before is around notifications. One of the kind of powerful tools that's available through workflows is to set up notifications. And on a very simple level, we could do something like even just changing the status on a record, which then could be tied to a dashboard widget and give notifications to anyone that's logged into the system. That's kind of more of a passive notification, but we have configured active notifications as well. So if you have an email server set up, we can set up email notifications that would go out. For example, we could email when a vendor has uploaded data, and we can include information in the email as well about which vendor has uploaded the data, how many records have been uploaded, things like that. We've also set up email notifications in the past that would actually include a file attachment as well. So we could include some of the data that was loaded in so that it can be reviewed on the spot. And even multiple emails triggered off of the same import. So for example, if there was an import that was done that went to a few different categories and there's different people that are responsible for those categories, we can email the records to the people that need to see it. We've also set up situations where after an import, we may separate the file into things like rush products that need to get processed right away, normal valid records that were imported, and then even invalid records that failed validation in one way. And the invalid records I want to expand on a little bit as well, because it's kind of an interesting case, because even if you try to make things as easy as possible, set up templates, for example, for vendors and allow them to upload the data, you will eventually get some records that may fail your validation rules. And we can actually set up workflows to help with this as well. So just to kind of preface this a little bit, EnterWorks does have built-in correction file features, and they work very well. You can highlight any errors that come up, and then it will generate a file that can be updated and imported back in. However, in this particular situation, we had a situation where we wanted the vendor to work with the same file format that they would use to import the data initially. So we had created a template that was used for the correction file that mimicked that initial import. And then through the workflow, we were able to generate a list of those invalid records and error messages that normally do not come out through a normal export, but we were able to attach that through the workflow. So again, just made it a little bit easier for users to work in that familiar template and correct the issues and import those back in. And so those are just some examples of some scenarios that we can handle with workflows.
Cool. And was the widgets that you're referring to that accepted these correction files, these are just standard, were these standardized out of the box widgets, or is this something that was customized?
In that case, those were just kind of standardized widgets that we had used. So it's more, the configuration on that one was more of the actual template rather than the, so there's definitely a lot of use cases where we're going to just use the out of the box widgets as well.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely great to point out, right? So there's, these are examples where you can use out-of-the-box capabilities to handle error validations, right? And this is pretty common that you may see with you're dealing with external vendors where, like I said earlier, they're not in the system often, right? So they're prone to make mistakes when it comes to onboarding products and other types of records into the system. So I think this is a great use case that highlights that. So yeah, thank you, Jen. So, as we continue to move on in our discussion with the vendor portal capabilities within the Enable 2020 UI, another common question that we get is, how do we quickly create user accounts, right, within the EnterWorks tool? So instead of having a admin or someone that has the capabilities to create new users, the ask is to allow the user or an individual to quickly just fill out a form that contains the user information and contact information and email address, take that information and create a user account. So it's kind of similar to any UI tool or onboarding tool that you may have been encountered with, right? When you're creating or establishing a new account. And for this customer, what we did was we mimicked that experience within the EnterWorks tool that allowed a user to put in that basic vendor information, and then we leveraged out-of-the-box workflows to basically put that record into workflow and then use SQL, in this case, a store procedure, to create a user account. So now that user is created within the tool. And then once they have their credentials available to them, they are now ready to actually log into the application and continue or to onboard their products or their vendor records. Now, with this capability, it can be extended, right, where you can send a notification to a particular user that they have been onboarded. And when I say notification, I basically mean an email notification, right, where they could get a notification and now they know and they are alerted that their account has been created in the tool, and then they can proceed with their tasks, whether that is to onboard a particular product or to onboard their vendor record themselves. So that's definitely another neat way of how we expanded the tool itself to quickly onboard users in an automated fashion. Another important use case that we hear all the time is, how do we take information within the EnterWorks platform and have some type of integration endpoint or a click of a button point to a service like Docusign to populate a annual buying agreement or a VBA, vendor buying agreement, or a W-9 form. And in this particular use case, we leverage custom components or custom buttons within the UI to make an API call to a Docusign service to generate a Docusign form. So basically how that works is from a vendor or user perspective, the process is streamless. They simply would just continue to enter and enrich their product or their vendor record. And really how it works is they just simply click the button and they are navigated to a pop-up window that displays the form depending on the type of form that they're filling out. So whether it's a W-9 or a VBA form, they get presented that window, they review it, they have the capabilities of going back to make changes if something is incorrect. And then the next button is to generate the actual Docusign form. And then from there, the users transition to a Docusign page, and they would have the ability to review the Docusign form, and then sign it. And then once it's signed, the vendor will get a copy of that document. Now, the cool thing with this is that not only is the document is being sent via email externally outside the EnterWorks application, that document that is signed is also is stored in the EnterWorks application, and it's linked to the associated record. So that's another use case of how we're using the tool to extend other capabilities, external capabilities with the EnterWorks platform. And it's pretty common, and it's something that we're seeing more and more often on our various projects. And moving on from that, when we go into and we talk about the vendor portal, a key component of that is security access, right? So most of our customers, when it comes to external vendors, they do not want external vendor A looking at information that may pertain to external vendor B. So the common question is, how can we do that, number one, and how is that done in the EnterWorks tool? So Brandon will actually go into a conversation and discussion of how he was able to solve that for a particular customer and a particular client, and limiting and using this security context to limit the views of an external vendor.
So thank you, Michael. Yeah, so security is definitely a big part of the vendor portal. We don't want, people seeing different information, and clients should only see certain information, then vendors should see certain properties as well. So what we did in that situation is set up content owner, and what this does is makes it so vendors can only see certain properties, certain tabs within EnterWorks. When you have hundreds of vendors or just a few, this is a great way to set up security so they can only see certain things. So this will help this will help clients only edit specific properties and specific categories within that repository. So for an example, when you're onboarding a new vendor, what we did is set up, if the vendor was set up in the outside system, which was a warehouse management system, if it was set up outside that system or outside Enable, you were not able to edit that property inside of Enable. You had to go to the warehouse management system to actually go edit that. And then we set up an integration in between the warehouse management system and Enable, so you can only update it in there. But if the value was set to Enable, you can actually go inside of Enable and make all the edits with inside EnterWorks and the UI. So that was a great feature that helped, make the master data editable if it was created in the warehouse management system, and if it was created in Enable, you can edit it in there. So that was a great way to pretty much hide properties from vendors that they weren't allowed to see or able to edit. Another example is you can also hide certain attributes and tabs from the vendors within the content ownership. So when you're onboarding a new vendor, for example, they want to be able to add in their own vendor name, their own address and phone number, but you don't want them to see your internal, maybe the way you're categorizing the vendor and stuff like that. So you can hide that information that's just for your internal team, and then hide it from the rest of everybody else. This is another example is during the vendor onboarding processes, you can make it so they can only edit certain properties in there if it's set to a specific value. Kind of like in the warehouse management system example that I just gave, you can also do that with certain categories. So only certain team members, if they're part of a certain category, can enter and make those certain updates based on content security and content owner, or your more basic security options. That's pass it
Thanks,
back
Brandon.
to
So,
you.
yeah, so with these examples, did the external user or external vendor, did they work in the context of workflow, or, with some of these security settings just managed without, workflow being involved?
So these are all, or with this specific example, these were managed outside of the workflow.
Okay.
Since all the data was just getting entered in and enable, and then via API, which was not a workflow, is just coming in on a nightly basis from the warehouse management system, any updates that come from that system.
Got it. Yeah, so, and I think we talked about various use cases, right, where, Jen was giving examples where there's more governance around workflows, restricting how users for uploading and importing data into the application with files. And then the example that you're providing is outside the context of workflow, where we're using security owners feature to control what the vendor is entering or applying into the application.
Yeah.
So I think there's various ways, depending on a customer requirements, on how to solution the vendor portal UI experience within the 2020 UI.
Definitely.
Cool. I think that's definitely a great example there. And then there's also, expanding outside of the 2020 UI, there's also capabilities within the EnterWorks platform to use their sales portal, right? And then that's when we get into, using price lists and brochures, or even InDesign to do certain capabilities within the tool. And I would like David to touch on some of these capabilities of the sales portal that is extended from the EnterWorks platform.
Certainly. So thanks for that introduction, Michael. And just to kind of highlight that a little bit more, think about things in the context of the purpose and use case for EnterWorks as a whole. We're trying to gather information from multiple sources. We're trying to enrich it a certain way. And then we want to be able to utilize that with downstream targets, whether that's an e-commerce website, whether that is an ERP system such as SAP. However, there also might be a need for internal employees, sales teams, whatever they may be, to be able to access that enriched content and leave behind customized flyers, customized price lists, customized item lists for things that may be new catalog items that you just recently enriched. And as Michael mentioned, the way that we can do that through the EnterWorks platform is that we have an extension, the Sales and Service Portal, that allows you to have your internal teams that are familiar with tools such as Adobe InDesign create templates that can be utilized for either single or multi-page types of documents. And then they have the ability to go through almost a bit of an online catalog, if you will, to search for items or to search for products that they would like to have associated with that template. Inside of the Sales and Service Portal, we give you capabilities to drag and drop things into kind of a shopping cart, if you will, of items that you would like to have appear on these different publications when they're executed. And we also give you the ability to have things like being able to download prior versions of documents that might have been created. So your team might have created a price list that's good for 3 months. Instead of having to generate it multiple times, it can be generated once, positioned within the Sales and Service Portal, and downloaded by anybody that needs it. Then we also give you access to download other assets and other objects that may be associated with items that have been managed within the EnterWorks platform, such as images or PDF documents or anything else that's linked to your object, like linked to your product. And when we run these in execution time, they can come out in a fashion that's a zip file that either contains only the document that you'd like to have as the leave behind, or the document and all of the images and all of the data, if you wanted to leave behind things like that as well. But it's a self-serve type of portal. some of the same types of access controls that we've been discussing already through the Ask the Expert session here are available as well. So you may have certain sales teams that are able to access one category of items, but a different set of sales personnel that may access a different category of items. So you can utilize security context and other attribute and record security filters to ensure that only the sales teams that need to access certain values or certain objects will be able to do so. And this can be extended, right? There are ways that you can customize the sales and service portal to match what I would call internal customer designs. We have a document that we provide associated with that allows you to customize certain things, backgrounds, color schemes, things along those lines, so that you can more fluidly embed it inside of your own working environment as well. So along with the things that we're able to do with the vendor portal and the things that we're able to do with the sales and service portal, it provides a really comprehensive way to extend the functionality of the tool to allow people that aren't day-to-day users, that aren't in there every day, to either provide information that can be enhanced and enriched in your environment, or once that information has been enhanced and enriched, to be able to access it in an ad hoc, very fluid fashion for any types of needs that you might have behind the scenes. So we've seen customers do things like this for price lists, as we've mentioned. We've seen people do this for creating items that are new catalog issues, as I mentioned as well. But the availability of what can be presented through the sales and service portal is really only limited by your imagination and your creativity. Not only do we have the ability when you're creating these portals to create a single portal maybe for one repository of data or one domain of data that you're looking at, but within one instance of the EnterWorks platform, you can actually configure multiple portals. The configuration allows us to do that. So if you needed to have a portal for, let's just say you had a portal for vendor domain, that you wanted vendor information to be accessed, and then you had another domain for customers, or another domain for product, or another domain for grocery or dairy, whatever it may be, you can set up as many portals as you need to within the infrastructure. So each one of them will have its own access page with its own logins and credentials, and everybody that accesses it will only be able to access the data that they need to have at that given time. So these are just some great ideas that we can pass on along. And if I can expand even a little bit on some of the things that were discussed already within the vendor portal, the vendor portal also provides the capability through some of those custom widgets to think about things that you may not normally have as a part of your day-to-day operation. So in a prior life, I worked for a company that essentially managed large, I'll call them large commercial items that you would buy that you use in your kitchen or you might use in your laundry room. And then within that environment, they would manage the providers that would go out and do service for you. And they were very much into scorecarding in that environment. So they wanted to know what was the on-time or first-time completion rates, things along those lines. So think about the data that you're already gathering inside of the EnterWorks environment, and think about some of the things that you might be able to extend as you're extending the infrastructure out to your vendors. As the vendors are providing data to your systems, you're also getting quality information based off of validation rules that may be firing or changes that are occurring to the data as it's going through various enrichment. And you can start to use that to potentially even give your vendors scorecards to let them know how well are we doing as far as the data that we're providing to company XYZ. That way, it gives them insight into their own practices and to make sure that they're providing that quality data to you before it gets into the system and starts to have to go through some of the churn of either workflow or internal and external communications. And that will help them streamline their activities as they present data to you, which in turn downstream streamlines your activities as well, because you're not having to go back and fix errant data or data that may have issues in it. So just kind of keep your thinking caps on about things like that, because some of the data that's being managed as a part of this in the EnterWorks infrastructure through the Empower Data Mart and other tools, you can create reports utilizing Power BI or Tableau or even Jasper reports And those reports can also be embedded directly into the dashboards that both Jen and Brendan were speaking about earlier. So lots of different things to think about as you're going down the journey towards portal usage inside of your environment. And as EnterWorks works continuously with partners such as Amplifi, and we're getting information back from both our partners and from our customers, there are some great things coming on the horizon from a portal standpoint as well that we'd love to come back and chat with you about too.
That sounds good. Thank you, David. Just kind of quickly touching on the sales portal, because we have quite a few customers that may have the publication model. How does the publication model tie into the sales portal, or is that just specific to the classic UI or even the 2020 UI?
I wouldn't say that it's really tied to either UI. Now, the sales portal utilizes features and functions that are part of the 2020 user interface, but at its core, what we're really looking at are publication templates that are very similar in what you might use for our InDesign plugin, or even if we were to export the data that would be used by an InDesign document, that the templates that we position inside of the sales and service portal utilize that level of publication to provide essentially a template. You may have data in your repository that you want to come out in a certain fashion, or you may only want to have certain pieces of it come out, or certain versions of the images or other documents that are associated with it. So we will create a template that goes together with that InDesign template. So when you select a particular template, we already know the format that template is looking for, and we can utilize it either for, as I mentioned, single page types of documents, or if you've developed pagination into the template and into the information that you're getting from EnterWorks as a platform as well, we can actually do multi-page documents through those templates as well. So if you're familiar with those types of publication pieces through the EnterWorks platform already, very easy to just kind of build on that knowledge base and expand it to what can be done through the sales and service portal as well.
Cool. And based on your experience, do you see a lot of customers tie in workflows when it comes to building brochures or publications within the sales portal?
So we don't usually see too much in the way of a quote workflow, because of the fact that the templates are usually pretty single function, right? So each template has its own format that's associated with it. So the workflow, if you will, is not, don't think of it as a traditional EnterWorks workflow where there are different users that are going to be accessing it. This is already data that has been content curated, it's been enriched, and is positioned in what I would call your production environments, right? So you're only accessing the production data that you would want to leave behind with a customer, for example. So the workflow really is logging into the sales and service portal, navigating to the objects that you want to have as a part of a template that you want to generate. Then as you select publish, it will create all of that information behind the scenes. We're utilizing the job execution features within EnterWorks to actually execute those publication jobs. And then we bundle everything up in either, as I mentioned, that individual zip file that contains a PDF or whatever format your document is going to be in, as well as the image objects or the data itself that was exported as a part of that template too. So it's a very simple, it's more of a self-serve type of environment than a workflow where you're getting various approvals to push information out of the system.
Cool, very cool. This is all good. Thank you, David. So I think, as we all just discussed, there's various options within the Enable 2020 UI, and it's pretty robust. And David walked us through the capabilities within the sales portal. So thank you, David and Jen and Brendan for sharing your use case and your experience with these various different components. From here, I would definitely like to move on to questions that we have from our participants. So let's see what we have. So one of the questions that we received is it going to be a single portal for all vendors and control access using attribute security groups? So that's actually Brendan kind of touched on that. So in regards to the vendor portal itself and the application, typically the vendor portal is really a single instance of the EnterWorks application. But how that is managed and controlled is with security, the security filters or record security that we can add to a particular vendor user. So in our experience, we typically would like to strip down what the vendor has access to, right? So typically it's just widgets and it's actionable, right? So as a vendor, you log in and you know what you need to do. You see your record, you can click on your record and you will enrich your record. But how that is controlled, along with removing certain components within the tool, is tying in either a vendor name, a vendor ID, or a product record ID that is unique to that particular vendor, and associating that ID with the user. And then that ID is also applied to the actual record. So it creates that relationship between the record and the user. And now that user only has access to records that are linked via that particular ID. So that's, the best practices around managing the user experience when it comes to external vendors.
And there's one other thing that I might toss in there for attendees on the call to kind of consider as they're going down the path and examining whether this is a function that they want to be able to take advantage of. So consider that the EnterWorks platform has the ability to have multiple environments, if you will, in one instance. So traditionally, people will have a QA environment where they're working on any new changes or anything that's going to be new in the environment. And then you have a staging and a production environment. There's also the ability within the platform to create something that is a pre-staging environment. So as you think about how data might flow between buckets, if you will, from a vendor to being enriched internally by your company staff to being ready for production, a lot of times when we're going through the sales cycle with various customers that are looking at this, we promote the ability to have vendors access only the pre-staging environment. So all of the data that they might want to provide to you goes into the pre-staging environment first. And since it's still a part of your overall EnterWorks environment, you have the ability to tie workflow to it. You can still interact with the information that the vendors have. And once it reaches a certain level of data quality that you would like to ensure that all the vendors provide, it can be promoted to a staging environment where your own internal enrichment and data governance processes take over before it's promoted to production. So there are ways where you can, make sure that you're isolating the data that the vendors are providing to you on top of what we can do from a security and filtering perspective to ensure that only the good data is being enriched by your team, again, saving you time, and then making sure that it doesn't impact your production data in any way, shape, or form because we've got two layers of abstraction between it. So that's just something to think of potentially architecturally as you consider this solution as well for your environment.
Perfect. Thank you, David. So I think that's all of the questions that we have so far. I will hand it back over to Tracy.
All right. Great. David, Michael, Jen, and Brendan, this was some amazing content today. Thank you all for sharing your knowledge with us. Well, everyone, this concludes today's webinar, but as a thank you for attending this Ask the Expert session, we are offering a complimentary one-to-one follow-up session with an expert to answer the questions that you have utilizing EnterWorks for your vendor relationships. If you're interested in taking advantage in this one-to-one session, just respond to our follow-up email or email us directly at experts@goamplify.com, and we'll be happy to get you started. We hope that this webinar gave you the opportunity to see what Amplifi and the EnterWorks platform has to offer. Let's continue the conversation on how we can make your MDM initiative a success with our many data management and strategy offerings. Expect an email in the coming days, and that will be delivering your recording from today. Be sure to keep an eye out for more Ask the Expert sessions as we continue to be your trusted resource in the MDM space. That's all from us. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Bye.